I was shoveling my driveway in Duluth, Minnesota, when I saw Patricia Henderson marching toward me with her phone held up like she was filming a crime scene, and I knew my Tuesday morning was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Lucas Oliver. Her shrill voice cut through the crisp February air. I am documenting this egregious violation of our community standards. I leaned on my shovel, watching my breath form clouds in the 18-degree weather. We had gotten hammered with 23 inches of snow over the past 2 days, and the entire neighborhood of Birchwood Estates looked like something out of a winter postcard. Beautiful, sure, but a nightmare to deal with when you are trying to get to work. "Morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level. "What violation are we talking about today?" Patricia stopped about 10 feet from my driveway, her puffy purple coat making her look like an angry grape. She pointed dramatically at the pile of snow I had been building along the edge of my property. "That monstrosity. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that snow piles cannot exceed 4 feet in height." I looked at my snow pile. It was tall, I would give her that. When you are shoveling a 3-car driveway and a walkway, you have got to put the snow somewhere. I had been piling it along the property line, away from the street, exactly where any reasonable person would put it. "Patricia, it is February in Minnesota. Where exactly do you expect me to put the snow?" "That is not my problem," she snapped. "The rules are the rules, Lucas. As president of the Birchwood Estates HOA, it is my responsibility to ensure all residents comply with our community standards. This is why people pay their dues." I had been living in Birchwood Estates for 3 years, and Patricia had been the HOA president for all 3 of those years. She was 52 years old, had never worked a day outside her home according to the neighborhood gossip, and seemed to spend every waking hour finding new things to complain about. Last month, she had sent me a violation notice because my garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. The month before that, she had measured the height of my grass and claimed it was a 1/4 inch too tall. "I will take care of it when I get a chance," I said, turning back to my shoveling. "Got to get to work." "You will take care of it immediately, or I will have no choice but to call the authorities." I actually laughed at that one. "The authorities." "You are going to call the cops because my snow pile is too tall, if necessary, yes." Patricia's face was turning red, which was quite a sight against her purple coat. "This is a matter of public safety and community standards. You know what, Patricia? Go ahead, call them." I was done playing nice. I had been patient with her nonsense for 3 years, but this was ridiculous. "Call the cops and tell them there is an emergency because my snow pile is too high. I am sure they will rush right over." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I will not do it?" "You are testing the wrong person, Lucas Oliver." She pulled out her phone, and I actually did not think she would go through with it. But Patricia Henderson was nothing if not committed to making everyone around her miserable. She dialed, held the phone to her ear, and I kept shoveling while she spoke to someone. "Yes, hello, I need to report a violation," she said in her most officious voice. "I am the president of the Birchwood Estates Homeowner Association, and one of our residents is in clear violation of our community bylaws. His snow pile exceeds the permitted height, and it is creating a hazard." I could not hear the response, but I saw Patricia's face get even redder. "Yes, I understand you have other priorities, but this is a matter of community safety. No, I am not saying it is an emergency, but, well, if you could send someone when available." "Yes, I will be here." She hung up and glared at me. "An officer will be here within the hour to assess the situation." "Great," I said. "I will be at work. Feel free to wait around in the cold." I finished the last section of my driveway, loaded my shovel into the garage, and got ready to leave. Patricia was still standing there, filming my snow pile with her phone like she was gathering evidence for a murder trial. My job as an architect at Morrison and Clark Associates was only 15 minutes away, but the roads were still pretty rough from the storm. By the time I got to the office, changed out of my winter gear and grabbed a coffee, I had almost forgotten about Patricia's threat. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Is this Lucas Oliver? A male voice, professional but friendly. Yes, this is Lucas. This is Officer Dennis Martinez with the Duluth Police Department. I am currently at your residence at 847 Birchwood Lane. Your HOA president called about a snow pile height issue. I actually felt bad for the guy. Officer, I am so sorry you got dragged into this. Patricia Henderson has a habit of making mountains out of molehills, literally in this case. Officer Martinez chuckled. Yeah, I kind of figured. But since I am here, would you mind if I take some measurements, just to document everything properly? Not at all. Measure away. My property line is clearly marked. Appreciate it. I will give you a call back when I am done. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Mr. Oliver, this is Officer Martinez again. So I measured your snow pile. At its highest point, it is sitting at 4 feet and 7 inches. Okay, I said, waiting for the lecture about HOA rules. Here is the thing, Officer Martinez continued, and I could hear something like amusement in his voice. Your HOA president was pretty insistent that I document this as a violation. So I asked her if there were any other properties I should check while I was here, just to be thorough. And I measured her snow pile. Mr. Oliver, Patricia Henderson's snow pile is 6 feet and 11 inches tall, nearly 2.5 feet taller than yours. I almost dropped my coffee. You are kidding. Not even a little bit. I documented everything with photos and measurements. She was not happy when I pointed out the discrepancy. I bet she was not. She tried to tell me that her pile did not count because it was positioned differently, but a violation is a violation, right? At least according to what she told me when I first got here. I could not help but grin. Officer Martinez, thank you for being thorough. Just doing my job. Anyway, I gave her a copy of my report. I figured you might want one too for your records. Can I email it to you? I gave him my email address and thanked him again. After we hung up, I sat at my desk trying to process what had just happened. Patricia Henderson, the woman who had made my life difficult for 3 years with her constant complaints and violation notices, had just been hoisted by her own petard. The schadenfreude was delicious, but I also knew Patricia well enough to know this was not over. She did not handle being wrong very well, and she definitely did not handle being embarrassed. By noon, the group chat for Birchwood Estates was blowing up. Apparently, word had spread fast about the police visit and the measurements. My neighbor, Carl Davies, texted me directly. Dude, did Patricia really call the cops on your snow pile? She did, I replied. And the cop measured hers and it was taller, almost 7 feet. Oh man, this is beautiful. She has been on my case about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. The wrong shade of black, Lucas. I knew exactly what Carl meant. Patricia had a gift for finding the most absurd things to complain about. The group chat was full of similar stories. Rebecca Simmons had gotten a violation for having a decorative flag that was not approved by the HOA. Tom and Jennifer Marsh had been fined because their Christmas lights stayed up until January 4th. Mike Peterson had received a warning because his dog barked too loudly during the day. Everyone had a Patricia story, and now everyone was loving this development. By the time I got home that evening, there was an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal letter from the Birchwood Estates HOA. signed by Patricia Henderson, stating that my snow pile was in violation of community standards, and I had 72 hours to remedy the situation or face a fine of $250. The audacity was stunning. I took a photo of the letter and texted it to Officer Martinez, along with a message. Just wanted to document this. Pretty sure the HOA president cannot fine me for something she is more guilty of. He responded within minutes. Keep that letter. You might need it. The next morning, I woke up to find another envelope, this time from Patricia's lawyer. The letter stated that if I did not comply with the HOA bylaws regarding snow pile height, the HOA would pursue legal action to enforce compliance and recover any costs associated with the violation. This was escalating fast. I called my own lawyer, a guy named Steve Murphy, who I had used when buying my house. He listened to the whole story, asked me to send him all the documentation including Officer Martinez's report, and then started laughing. "Lucas, this is the most ridiculous thing I have heard all month," Steve said. "And I had a client last week who got sued because his parrot was too loud. So what do I do? Nothing. Do not touch your snow pile, do not pay any fines. Let her pursue this if she wants. With that police report showing her pile is taller than yours, she has no leg to stand on. In fact, if she keeps pushing this, we could potentially argue harassment." "Harassment? You said she has been giving you violations for 3 years. Document everything. Every letter, every fine, every complaint. If there is a pattern of her singling you out or applying rules selectively, that is harassment." I had not thought about it that way, but Steve was right. I started going through my files and found dozens of violation notices from Patricia over the years. Some of them were legitimate, like the time I forgot to bring in my trash cans for 2 days. But most of them were absurd. She had once sent me a letter complaining that my car was parked in my own driveway at an angle that was aesthetically displeasing. That evening, there was an emergency HOA meeting. Patricia had called it to address ongoing compliance issues within the community. Translation: she was mad about being called out and wanted to reassert her authority. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the front entrance of Birchwood Estates. By the time I arrived at 7 p.m., the room was packed. Apparently, everyone wanted to see how this would play out. Patricia stood at the front of the room behind a podium, looking stern in a navy blue suit. Next to her were the other 2 HOA board members. Douglas Fletcher, a retired accountant who mostly nodded and agreed with whatever Patricia said, and Karen Miller, a middle-aged woman who had only been on the board for 6 months and usually looked uncomfortable during meetings. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Patricia began. "We are here tonight to discuss the importance of maintaining community standards, especially during winter months when property maintenance can become challenging. We are here because you called the cops on Lucas for having snow in Minnesota," someone shouted from the back. I turned and saw it was Mike Peterson, the guy with the supposedly loud dog. Patricia's jaw tightened. "That is not an accurate characterization of events." "Really?" I stood up. "Because Officer Martinez told me you specifically called to report my snow pile as a violation, and then he measured it and found that yours was almost 2.5 feet taller than mine." The room erupted in murmurs and a few outright laughs. Patricia banged her gavel on the podium. "Order. This meeting will be conducted with respect and decorum." "Respect goes both ways, Patricia," Carl Davies called out. "You have been harassing people in this neighborhood for years. I am enforcing the bylaws that you all agreed to when you purchased property in Birchwood Estates." "Selectively," Rebecca Simmons added. You sent me a violation for my garden flag, but the Hendersons 3 doors down have had the same type of flag for 2 years. Yeah, coincidentally, the Hendersons are your cousin's family, right, Patricia? Tom Marsh stood up. Seems like you enforce rules for everyone except people you like. This was not going the way Patricia had planned. Her face was bright red, and Douglas Fletcher was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Karen Miller looked like she wanted to disappear. If you all have complaints about how the HOA is run, there are proper channels, Patricia said, her voice rising. You can submit written concerns to the board, and we will review them at our quarterly meetings. Or we could just vote you out, Mike Peterson said. How many signatures do we need to call for a vote of no confidence? Patricia actually looked shocked. You cannot do that. Actually, we can, Karen Miller spoke up quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. I have been reviewing the HOA bylaws, and according to Article 12, Section 4, any board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the homeowners. We just need a petition signed by 20% of residents to trigger the vote. Patricia stared at Karen like she had just committed treason. Karen, you are part of this board, I am aware, but I am also supposed to represent the interests of all residents, not just enforce rules arbitrarily. Karen pulled out a folder. I have been keeping records of violation notices issued over the past year. Patricia, you have issued 78 violations. 63 of them have been to just 12 households. Meanwhile, there are documented issues with other properties that have received no notices at all. That is because those properties are in compliance. Really. Because I drove around yesterday and took photos. The McMillan house has a snow pile that I measured at 5 feet 9 inches. The Rodriguez property has one at 5 feet 3 inches. The Chen family has one at 6 feet even. All taller than Lucas Oliver's pile, and none of them have received violation notices. The room was dead silent. Patricia looked like she might explode. I see what this is, Patricia said coldly. This is a coordinated attack on my leadership, because I actually care about maintaining property values in this community. No, I said, standing up again. This is about you abusing your position to bully people you do not like. I have documentation of every violation notice you have sent me in 3 years, Patricia. Some of them were valid. Most of them were ridiculous. And now you have tried to fine me for something you are literally more guilty of than I am. My snow pile is positioned in a way that does not impact visibility or safety. Then why does the bylaw not make that distinction? You want to enforce rules, fine, but they need to be enforced fairly and equally. Douglas Fletcher cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion and review the bylaws to ensure they are being applied consistently. We do not need to table anything, Patricia snapped. I am the president of this board, and I make the decisions about enforcement priorities. Actually, according to the bylaws, enforcement decisions require a board vote, Karen said, still looking at her folder. That is Article 5, Section 2. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Karen, I am starting to question whether you are suited for this board. And I am starting to question whether you are suited to lead it. The room erupted in applause. Patricia grabbed her papers and stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving Douglas and Karen at the front. Douglas looked lost, but Karen took charge. Okay, everyone, Karen said. If there is serious interest in calling for a vote regarding board leadership, I can provide the necessary forms and information. We need signatures from 20% of households, which is 18 properties in our community. The petition needs to state specific reasons for the vote, and then we would schedule a formal election within 30 days. I will sign it, I said immediately. Me too, Carl added. Within 15 minutes, we had 23 signatures. Karen promised to process everything according to the bylaws and schedule the vote. As everyone filed out of the clubhouse, there was a sense of excitement in the air. People were talking, sharing their own Patricia stories and bonding over shared frustration. I drove home feeling like maybe, just maybe, we had started something positive. But Patricia Henderson was not the type of person to go down without a fight. The next morning, I woke up to find my snow pile had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "violation" in bright red letters across it. There were also orange flags stuck in the pile at the 4-foot height mark, with laminated signs that read, "Illegal height exceeds this point." I took photos and called Officer Martinez. "That is destruction of property," he said when he arrived to take a report. "Technically, it is your snow on your property. Do you have any security cameras?" "No, but my neighbor might." Carl did have a camera that covered his driveway, and when we checked the footage, we got lucky. At 2:30 in the morning, a figure in a dark coat had walked onto my property with a backpack and spent about 10 minutes spray painting and planting flags. The footage was not crystal clear because of the darkness and falling snow, but you could see the person was about Patricia's height and build. "I cannot arrest anyone based on this footage alone," Officer Martinez said, "but I can definitely have a conversation with Mrs. Henderson about it." He left, and I spent the morning cleaning spray paint off snow, which was both absurd and infuriating. By noon, Officer Martinez called me back. "Had an interesting conversation with your HOA president," he said. "She denied being on your property last night. Said she was home all evening and her husband can confirm it. Of course she did. However, I did notice that she had orange flag markers identical to the ones on your property sitting in her garage, along with a can of red spray paint. Can you do anything with that?" Without a positive ID or a confession, not really. But I documented everything in my report. If this escalates to court, it will be useful. And escalate it did. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA's lawyer stating that I owed $250 for the snow pile violation, another $100 for failing to remove the unsightly markings from my property in a timely manner, and $50 in administrative fees. Total $400. I forwarded it to Steve Murphy. "Do not pay a cent," he said. "In fact, I think it is time we go on the offensive." I am going to send a letter to the HOA board and their lawyer laying out the situation, including the police report showing Patricia's pile was taller, the evidence of selective enforcement, and the vandalism incident. We will demand they drop all fines and violations, and we will suggest that if they do not, we will pursue legal action for harassment. Steve sent the letter that afternoon. The HOA lawyer responded 2 days later, stating that the board would review the matter and respond within 10 business days. Meanwhile, the petition for a vote of no confidence was officially submitted. Karen Miller sent out an email to all residents explaining the process and setting a date for the vote, March 7th, exactly 3 weeks away. Patricia responded with her own email, defending her record as HOA president and claiming that a small group of malcontents were trying to undermine the community's values. She listed all the things she had accomplished during her tenure: maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and ensuring property values remained high. She did not mention the 78 violation notices or the selective enforcement. The neighborhood was divided. Some people supported Patricia, mostly older residents who valued strict rule enforcement and saw the HOA as essential for maintaining order. But a larger group was firmly in the "remove Patricia" camp. These were the people who had been on the receiving end of her complaints and who were tired of living in fear of violating some obscure bylaw. Carl and I started attending more HOA meetings and reviewing the bylaws in detail. What we found was troubling. Many of the rules Patricia enforced were either outdated, unclear, or not actually in the official bylaws at all. She had been making up rules or interpreting them in ways that gave her more power. For example, the snow pile rule. We found the original bylaw, which stated that snow removal should be conducted in a manner that does not impede traffic or create hazards for pedestrians. Nothing about a 4-foot height limit. Patricia had apparently added that interpretation herself in a memo 3 years ago, and everyone had just accepted it. The garbage can rule. The bylaw said cans should not be permanently visible from the street. Patricia had interpreted permanently to mean more than 12 hours after collection. The grass height rule. The bylaw said lawns should be maintained in a neat and tidy condition. Patricia had decided that meant grass could not exceed 3 inches, even though the bylaw did not specify a measurement. We compiled all of this into a document and shared it with other residents. The response was overwhelming. People were furious that they had been paying fines for violations that were not even real. 5 days before the vote, Patricia made her biggest mistake yet. She sent out an email to all residents stating that anyone who voted to remove her from the board would be subject to increased scrutiny to ensure they were in full compliance with all community standards. She followed this up with a list of properties that currently had potential violations pending review. Every single property on that list belonged to someone who had signed the petition. I forwarded the email to Steve Murphy and Officer Martinez. "This is witness intimidation," Steve said immediately. "Or at least attempted intimidation of people exercising their legal rights in an HOA matter. This is bad, Lucas. This could actually be criminal." Officer Martinez agreed. He called me that evening and said he had discussed the matter with his sergeant, and they were considering investigating Patricia for harassment and intimidation. The spray-painted snow pile incident, combined with the threatening email, was enough to establish a pattern. "We are going to send an officer to have a formal conversation with her tomorrow," Martinez said, "just to make it clear that this behavior is not acceptable." The next day, 2 police officers visited Patricia's house. I did not witness the conversation, but Carl's wife saw the whole thing from her window and gave me a play-by-play later. Apparently, Patricia had denied threatening anyone and said her email was simply informing residents about pending compliance issues. The officers told her that targeting people who had signed a legal petition could be considered harassment, and if she continued, she could face criminal charges. Patricia had not taken that well. According to Carl's wife, there was a lot of shouting, and Patricia had threatened to call the mayor, the police chief, and anyone else who would listen. The officers left after 20 minutes, and Patricia's car screeched out of her driveway 30 minutes after that. The day of the vote arrived. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the clubhouse, and by 6:30, the parking lot was full. People were parking on the street and walking over. I had never seen this many residents at an HOA meeting before. Karen Miller had organized everything meticulously. She had printed ballots, set up a private voting area, and arranged for an independent counter to tally the results. She explained that the vote would be simple: yes or no on removing Patricia Henderson as HOA president. If the vote passed with a 2/3 majority, Patricia would be immediately removed from her position, and the board would hold a new election for president within 2 weeks. Patricia arrived at 6:45, wearing a black suit and an expression that could cut glass. She sat in the front row with her arms crossed, staring straight ahead. Douglas Fletcher arrived a few minutes later, looking uncomfortable as usual. He took his seat next to Karen at the board table. At 7 p.m. sharp, Karen called the meeting to order. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. As you all know, we are here to conduct a vote regarding the removal of Patricia Henderson from her position as HOA president. Before we vote, both Patricia and the petitioners will have an opportunity to speak for 5 minutes each. Patricia, as the current president, you will go first." Patricia stood up and walked to the podium. She smoothed her jacket and looked out at the crowd. "I have served this community as HOA president for 3 years, she began. During that time, property values in Birchwood Estates have increased by an average of 12%. We have had 0 issues with code violations from the city. Our common areas are immaculate. We have had successful community events, including summer barbecues, holiday parties, and neighborhood cleanup days. All of this happened because someone was willing to enforce the rules and maintain standards." She paused, looking directly at me. "I understand that not everyone appreciates having rules. Some people would prefer to live in chaos, where everyone does whatever they want with no regard for how it affects their neighbors. But that is not what Birchwood Estates is about. When you bought property here, you agreed to abide by certain standards. My job as president has been to hold everyone accountable to those standards, including yourself." Someone shouted from the back. Patricia ignored the interruption. "If you vote to remove me tonight, you are voting to lower the standards of this community. You are voting to let people park junk cars in their driveways, let their lawns become overgrown, and turn this neighborhood into something none of us want to live in. That is your choice to make, but understand the consequences." She sat down to scattered applause, mostly from the older residents who supported her. Karen looked at me. "Lucas, as the primary petitioner, would you like to speak?" I stood up and walked to the podium, suddenly very aware that everyone was looking at me. Public speaking was not my favorite thing, but this mattered. "I am not going to stand here and tell you Patricia has not done some good things for this community," I began. "She has organized events. She has kept the common areas maintained, but those things are not enough to excuse the way she has abused her position." I pulled out the folder Carl and I had compiled. In the past year alone, Patricia has issued 78 violation notices. 63 of them went to just 12 households. Meanwhile, there are documented violations at other properties that have received 0 notices. Why? Because those properties belong to people Patricia likes, or people who do not question her authority. I held up Officer Martinez's report. "When I had a snow pile that measured 4 feet 7 inches, Patricia called the police and demanded I be fined. The officer measured her pile at 6 feet 11 inches. When I received a violation notice anyway, I knew this was not about rules. This was personal." I pulled out more papers. "Patricia has enforced rules that do not exist in the bylaws. She has made up height requirements, time limits, and standards that have no basis in the actual governing documents we all signed. And when people questioned her, she retaliated." I held up the printed email. 5 days ago, Patricia sent an email threatening increased scrutiny on anyone who voted to remove her. That is intimidation. That is abuse of power. And frankly, that is not someone who should be leading this community. I looked around the room. This vote is not about whether we have rules. It is about whether those rules are applied fairly, consistently, and in good faith. Under Patricia's leadership, they have not been. We deserve better. I sat down to much louder applause than Patricia had received. Karen thanked both of us and then explained the voting process one more time. "Ballots are on the table by the door. Please mark your vote clearly. Yes to remove Patricia Henderson or no to keep her as president. Fold your ballot and place it in the sealed box. Everyone is entitled to one vote per household. We will count votes after everyone has had a chance to participate. The line for ballots formed quickly. It took about 40 minutes for everyone to vote, and during that time, the tension in the room was thick. Patricia sat rigid in her seat, not looking at anyone. Douglas kept checking his phone. Karen remained calm and professional, but I could see the strain on her face. Finally, the last ballot was cast. Karen and Douglas, along with the independent counter Karen had hired, a notary named Wendy Norton, took the ballot box to a back room to tally the votes. We waited. People talked in hushed voices. Some scrolled through their phones. A few stepped outside for fresh air. I sat with Carl and our other neighbors who had been most active in the petition, trying not to think about what would happen if the vote failed. After 30 minutes, Karen, Douglas, and Wendy returned. Karen was holding a paper with the results. "Thank you everyone for your patience," Karen said. "We had 81 households cast ballots tonight. To pass, the measure needed 54 yes votes, which is 2/3 of the total." I will now read the results. The room was silent. The vote to remove Patricia Henderson as HOA president, 67 yes, 14 no. The measure passes. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Patricia stood up abruptly, her face pale. "This is ridiculous. This vote was rigged. You all have no idea what you have done to this community." "Patricia, please," Douglas said quietly. "The vote was fair." "Fair, fair. You all just destroyed everything I built here. I hope you are happy when this place falls apart." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the clubhouse door behind her. The sound echoed through the sudden silence. Karen waited a moment, then continued. "According to the bylaws, the board will schedule an election for a new president within 2 weeks. In the interim, as vice president, I will assume temporary leadership responsibilities. Our first priority will be to review all pending violations and ensure our enforcement policies align with the actual bylaws." More applause. People came up to thank Karen for her handling of the situation. Others congratulated me and the other petitioners. There was a sense of relief in the room, like a weight had been lifted. I went home that night feeling good about what we had accomplished, but also a little worried about how Patricia would react. She had not taken this well, and I doubted she was just going to fade quietly into the background. I was right to worry. 2 days after the vote, I received a letter from Patricia's lawyer. It stated that Patricia was suing me personally for defamation and emotional distress, claiming that my statements at the HOA meeting had damaged her reputation and caused her severe psychological harm. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I immediately forwarded it to Steve Murphy. "This is a slap suit," Steve said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. She is trying to punish you for speaking out. Minnesota has anti-slap laws that protect people from this exact kind of thing. We are going to file a motion to dismiss, and we are going to ask for attorney's fees because this is clearly frivolous." Will that work? Almost certainly. Her lawyer has to know this is a weak case. My guess is they are hoping to intimidate you into settling, or at least make you spend money on legal fees. But we are not going to let that happen. Steve filed the motion to dismiss within a week, and we got a court date for the hearing. April 15th, about 5 weeks away. Meanwhile, Karen had taken over as interim president and was doing exactly what she promised. She formed a committee to review the bylaws and create clear, specific enforcement guidelines that could not be interpreted arbitrarily. She also reviewed all pending violations and dismissed about half of them as either baseless or not supported by the actual bylaws. The $300 in fines Patricia had assessed against me were officially waived. So were fines against about a dozen other households. The neighborhood started to feel different. People were friendlier. There was less tension. It felt like we could breathe again without worrying about some petty violation notice showing up in our mailboxes. But Patricia was not done causing problems. In late March, I came home from work to find that someone had filed a complaint with the city of Duluth, claiming that my property was not in compliance with city codes regarding drainage and snow removal. A city inspector showed up the next day to investigate. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Roger Paulson, walked around my property with a clipboard, checking drainage paths and measuring distances from the street. "I have got to be honest with you, Mr. Oliver," he said after about 30 minutes. "I do not see any violations here. Your drainage is fine, your snow removal is typical for the area, and everything looks up to code. Do you have any idea why someone would file this complaint?" I told him about the HOA situation and the lawsuit. He shook his head. "Sounds like harassment to me. I will document that everything is in compliance and close the complaint. If another one comes in about your property, we will note the pattern. The city does not like it when people abuse the complaint system." He left, and I called Steve Murphy to tell him what happened. "Document it," Steve said. "This adds to the pattern of harassment. If she keeps this up, we might be able to get a restraining order." The lawsuit hearing finally arrived on April 15th. Steve and I met at the St. Louis County Courthouse in downtown Duluth. Patricia was there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Richard Brennan. We all filed into the courtroom and waited for Judge Teresa Hawkins to arrive. When she did, she was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who looked like she had seen every kind of case imaginable and was not impressed by any of them. "We are here on a motion to dismiss in Henderson versus Oliver," Judge Hawkins said. "Mr. Murphy, you are moving to dismiss under the Minnesota anti-SLAPP statute." "Yes, Your Honor," Steve said, standing. "My client made statements at a homeowner association meeting regarding the HOA president's conduct. These statements were made in a public forum, concerned matters of public interest, and were protected speech. Ms. Henderson's lawsuit is an attempt to punish Mr. Oliver for exercising his First Amendment rights." Richard Brennan stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Oliver made false and defamatory statements that damaged my client's reputation and caused her significant emotional distress. This is not protected speech. He accused her of abusing her position and intimidating residents without evidence." "Without evidence." Steve pulled out a thick folder. "Your Honor, we have documentation of 78 violation notices issued by Ms. Henderson in 1 year, with 63 going to just 12 households. We have a police report showing Ms. Henderson's own property was in greater violation of HOA rules than my client's property. We have emails from Ms. Henderson threatening increased scrutiny on residents who voted against her. We have a complaint filed with the city that the city inspector found to be baseless. This is not defamation. This is a well-documented pattern of abuse." Judge Hawkins took the folder and spent several minutes reviewing the documents. Patricia's lawyer tried to interject a few times, but the judge held up her hand for silence. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Brennan, I have reviewed the evidence presented, and I am finding that Mr. Oliver's statements were substantially true and made in good faith regarding matters of legitimate public concern. The anti-SLAPP statute was designed specifically to prevent lawsuits like this one. The motion to dismiss is granted." Patricia actually gasped. Her lawyer looked like he had expected this result. "Furthermore," Judge Hawkins continued, I am awarding attorney's fees to the defendant. Mr. Brennan, your client will be responsible for Mr. Oliver's legal costs in defending this frivolous suit. I am also noting in the record that if Miss Henderson files any additional lawsuits against Mr. Oliver or other residents regarding these HOA matters, this court will consider sanctions. The gavel came down, and it was over. Patricia stood up and walked out of the courtroom without a word, her lawyer hurrying after her. Steve shook my hand. That went about as well as it could have. The attorney's fees will probably be around $5,000, which her insurance might cover, but either way, she is not getting a penny from you. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. We had won, and more importantly, Patricia had been put on notice that her behavior had consequences. But the story was not quite over yet. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I got a call from Officer Martinez. "Lucas, I wanted to give you a heads up. We have been investigating your HOA president for the vandalism incident back in February. We got some additional evidence." "What kind of evidence?" One of her neighbors came forward. Apparently they saw Miss Henderson leave her house around 2 in the morning the night your snow pile was spray painted. The neighbor thought it was weird but did not think much of it at the time. After the court case made the news, they connected the dots and called us. "So you can prove it was her?" Between the neighbor's statement, the footage from your neighbor's camera, and the spray paint and flags we documented in her garage, we have enough for charges. We are going to arrest her for criminal damage to property. Seriously. It is a misdemeanor, but it is still a crime. And given the harassment pattern documented in your court case, the prosecutor thinks we have a solid case. 3 days later, Patricia Henderson was arrested. It made the local news. The headline in the Duluth News Tribune read, "Former HOA President Arrested for Property Vandalism." The article detailed the whole saga, from the snow pile complaint to the lawsuit to the arrest. The neighborhood was buzzing. Some people felt bad for Patricia, thinking the arrest was too harsh for what amounted to spray painting snow. But most people, especially those who had been on the receiving end of her complaints over the years, felt it was justified. She had abused her position, harassed residents, and then committed a crime when she did not get her way. Actions have consequences. Patricia ended up pleading guilty to the vandalism charge in June. She was sentenced to 90 days of probation, 40 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage, which amounted to about $300 for my time and cleaning supplies. She was also ordered to have no contact with me or any other Birchwood Estates residents who had been involved in the HOA dispute. The judge had some choice words during sentencing. I was not there, but Steve Murphy got a copy of the transcript and read me the relevant parts. "Miss Henderson, you held a position of trust within your community, and you abused that trust," the judge had said. "Rather than serving your neighbors, you used your position to target people you disagreed with. When you faced legitimate consequences for your actions, you retaliated with vandalism and frivolous lawsuits. This behavior is unacceptable. I hope you use this probation period to reflect on how a leader should conduct themselves." Patricia and her husband quietly put their house on the market in July and moved out of Birchwood Estates by the end of August. I never saw her again after the courtroom hearing. Karen Miller was elected as the permanent HOA president in a special election in May. She ran unopposed and won with 93% of the vote. Her first act as president was to establish a formal complaint process for violation notices, requiring board approval before any fines were issued. She also organized a community meeting where residents could suggest changes to the bylaws. The changes were significant. The snow pile rule was revised to focus on safety rather than arbitrary height limits. The garbage can rule was clarified to mean cans could not be permanently stored in view of the street, but there was no time limit after collection. The grass height rule was eliminated entirely in favor of language requiring lawns to be reasonably maintained. Most importantly, Karen established a transparency policy. All violation notices, board decisions, and financial records would be posted on the HOA website within 48 hours. No more secret enforcement or selective application of rules. The neighborhood transformed. People started talking to each other again without the undercurrent of fear that Patricia had created. We had block parties. We helped each other with yard work. When someone legitimately violated a rule, it was handled with a conversation and a reasonable timeline to fix it, not an immediate fine. I became more involved in the HOA, serving on the bylaws committee and helping to modernize some of the outdated rules. It was actually kind of interesting once it stopped being a source of stress and became a way to make the community better. Carl and I would sometimes joke about the snow pile incident that started it all. If Patricia had just minded her own business, or if she had applied the rules fairly to everyone including herself, she would probably still be HOA president. Instead, her petness and need for control led to her losing everything: her position, her reputation, her money, and eventually her home. The spray-painted snow pile became something of a neighborhood legend. People would reference it when talking about proportional responses or the importance of checking your own behavior before criticizing others. "Do not be like Patricia," and the snow pile became a shorthand for not being hypocritical. By the time winter rolled around again the following year, I had invested in a snow blower that could throw snow farther, reducing the height of my piles. But honestly, I could have built a snow pile 10 feet tall, and Karen probably would not have said a word unless it was actually blocking something important. On a cold morning in January, almost exactly a year after the original incident, I was clearing my driveway when I saw Officer Martinez drive by on patrol. He stopped and rolled down his window. "How is it going, Lucas? Keeping those snow piles under control?" He was grinning. "Well under the legal limit, officer," I said, playing along. "But if you have got time to measure the HOA president's pile, I heard it might be 6 inches too tall." He laughed. "I think I will leave the measuring to someone else this year. That case was enough HOA drama for my entire career." "Fair enough. Thanks again for everything you did. That police report really made the difference. Just doing my job, though I've got to admit it was satisfying to catch someone being that hypocritical. You take care, Lucas." He drove off and I finished my driveling. The sun was coming out, making the snow sparkle like diamonds across the neighborhood. Birchwood Estates looked peaceful, the way a neighborhood should look. I thought about how much had changed in 1 year. A ridiculous complaint about snow pile height had exposed years of abuse, led to a community standing up for itself, and ultimately resulted in criminal charges against someone who thought they were untouchable. It had been stressful and expensive and time-consuming, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the most important fights are about the small things, because the small things reveal the truth about who people really are and how they treat others when they have power. Patricia Henderson had power, and she used it to make people's lives harder for no good reason. When called out, she doubled down, escalated, and eventually broke the law. She could have apologized at any point. She could have applied rules fairly. She could have been a leader instead of a tyrant. She chose poorly. As for me, I learned that standing up to bullies is hard but worth it. I learned that documentation is crucial. I learned that most people want to live in peace and will support you when you fight for fairness. And I learned that sometimes The most absurd situations lead to the most important changes. Also, I learned that if you are going to call the cops on someone for having a tall snow pile, you should probably measure your own pile first. That lesson seems obvious in hindsight, but Patricia Henderson apparently never figured it out. And that is why I still lived in Birchwood Estates with neighbors I liked and an HOA that actually served the community, while Patricia was living somewhere else, probably making some other neighborhood miserable. Or maybe, just maybe, she learned something from the experience and changed her ways. But I doubted it. People like Patricia rarely learn. They just find new places to exercise their need for control, new people to target, new rules to hide behind. That is why it is so important to stand up to them, to document their behavior, to not let them get away with abusing whatever small amount of power they have managed to accumulate. Because, if you do not stand up to them, who will? I finished shoveling and went inside to warm up with hot coffee. Through my front window, I could see the neighborhood going about its day. People walking dogs, kids building snowmen, someone across the street clearing their own driveway. Normal, peaceful, suburban winter life, exactly the way it should be. And if my snow pile was a few inches taller than some arbitrary standard someone made up 3 years ago, well, as long as it was not blocking anything or creating a hazard, it did not matter. Because that is what reasonable people understand. Rules should serve the community, not the other way around. That night, the HOA group chat was active with people sharing photos of their snow piles, jokingly asking if they were within regulations. Someone created a meme with Officer Martinez holding a measuring tape with the caption, HOA Compliance Unit. Karen responded with laughing emojis and reminded everyone that the annual meeting was coming up in March. Life in Birchwood Estates had returned to normal. Better than normal, actually, because now we had an HOA that worked for us instead of against us. We had leadership that listened instead of dictated. We had rules that made sense instead of rules designed to generate violations. All because Patricia Henderson could not help herself when she saw my snow pile that cold morning in February. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to that snow pile, the unlikely catalyst for positive change in our little corner of Duluth, Minnesota. It had melted months ago, but its impact would last for years. And somewhere out there, Patricia Henderson was probably still insisting she had done nothing wrong, that she was the victim, that the neighborhood had turned against her unfairly. Let her think that. Those of us who had lived through her reign knew the truth. The truth was in the 78 violation notices, in the selective enforcement, in the threatening emails, in the spray-painted snow, in the frivolous lawsuit, and in the criminal conviction. The truth was that Patricia Henderson had been given power and had abused it, and when the community took that power away, she could not handle it. The truth was that my snow pile had been 4 feet 7 inches tall, and hers had been 6 feet 11 inches, and that perfectly summarized everything wrong with her leadership. And the truth was that we were all better off without her. I finished my coffee and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new snow to shovel, new things to deal with. But it would not bring Patricia Henderson and her measuring tape and her violation notices and her need to control every aspect of everyone's lives, and that made all the difference. As I turned off the lights, I thought about Officer Martinez showing up that day, measuring both snow piles and delivering the news that Patricia's was taller. I thought about his professionalism, his thoroughness, and his subtle amusement at the absurdity of the situation. I thought about Karen Miller quietly documenting violations and speaking up at exactly the right moment to turn the tide. I thought about my neighbors who signed the petition, who showed up to vote, who stood together when it mattered. I thought about Steve Murphy expertly handling the lawsuit and getting it dismissed. I thought about the judge who saw through Patricia's tactics and awarded us attorneys' fees. And I thought about how all of these people, each doing their part, had come together to fix something that was broken. That is how change happens. Not through one dramatic moment, but through lots of people making small decisions to stand up, speak out, and do the right thing. My snow pile had been the spark, but the community had been the fire. And Patricia Henderson had been the kindling, dry and brittle and ready to burn. I smiled at the metaphor and closed my eyes, grateful for the peaceful neighborhood outside my window, and grateful that sometimes justice prevails in the most unexpected ways over the most unexpected things. Even snow piles in Minnesota,